Hello and welcome to UBLUR TV. I'm your host, Brant Harmon, and today my guest is Brant Stevens, attorney at law in Spokane, Washington. Brant, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, Brad.
We appreciate you making time to join us today. Now, Brant, you do bankruptcy law in Spokane, Washington. Can you tell me a little bit about what bankruptcy law is and what the different chapters are? I mean, you hear chapter 7, 11, 13. Most of us don't know what those are. Can you explain what it is you do and what those bankruptcy chapters represent?
So bankruptcy law is intended to provide individuals and businesses with financial help when they get to a point where there's really no alternative available as far as banks and private lending, and or if their debt is just accumulated to a point where they can't handle the financial debt load that they have. Most commonly, people will file a Chapter 7. There are certain situations where individuals will file a Chapter 13, and then there are the more high-profile cases intended for more intended for large corporations, or Chapter 11 filings. Individuals can file a Chapter 11, but it's unusual. They're fairly cost prohibitive. The filing fee on a Chapter 11 is over $1,000 just to file, and so mostly consumers will focus on either a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13.
That's good to know. So if you're an everyday person and you're struggling with debt and you could use some debt relief because you just can't handle the debt load and the payments anymore, there's the Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Can you explain to us what the difference between those two chapters are and why a person might choose to file one over the other?
Sure. So a Chapter 7, I think 90% of the bankruptcies that get filed are Chapter 7s. And a Chapter 7 is a liquidation. Essentially, all your assets and all your debts are put together into the bankruptcy estate, and both the federal statutes and state statutes provide for exemptions for your personal property, and so then you're able to exempt a majority of your assets back out of the bankruptcy estate, or at least protect them in the bankruptcy estate so that they're not sold to pay your creditors. But the idea behind a Chapter 7 is essentially all your assets, all your debts go into the bankruptcy estate. A majority of your debts are then discharged. A majority of your assets are protected by exemptions provided by both state and federal law, at least in the state of Washington. And so the majority of debtors that file for a Chapter 7 ultimately end up keeping their home, keeping their cars, keeping their furniture, their household goods, and at the same time discharging a majority of their debt. Almost all their unsecured debt is discharged: credit cards, medical bills. Taxes you cannot discharge. Student loans you cannot discharge. Those are some common things that I see in a Chapter 7 filing. Criminal fines you cannot discharge, but the majority of debt then gets discharged. Chapter 13 works a little bit differently, and I always analogize it to more of consumer credit counseling, where you go and talk to a credit counselor about your situation. They put together a plan for you to pay off your unsecured debt. It's essentially the same thing, the difference being that I can guarantee you at the end of either 3 to 5 years, you have to do a 3 to 5 year plan in a Chapter 13. At the end of that time period, your debts will be discharged. And in a Chapter 13, you end up getting a super discharge. And so there are things that would be non-dischargeable in a Chapter 7 that you actually can discharge in a Chapter 13, such as some infractions, a bigger portion of your tax liability, and so at the end of that plan, period, a majority of your debts get discharged. The reasons why people end up in a Chapter 13 over a Chapter 7, as you can see, a Chapter 7 would be preferred because in a Chapter 13 you actually have to make a planned payment every month. You end up paying at least a portion of your creditors back, even if it's only 5 cents on the dollar to your unsecured creditors. So generally people will choose to file a Chapter 13 over a Chapter 7, even though it's the preferred bankruptcy, because they may be behind on their mortgage payment and they need to stay out of the foreclosure type of a situation, make the payment on the arrearage that they have, make the payment on their mortgage, and make all those payments through the plan, and get back on their feet essentially through a Chapter 13 plan. A lot of the times people will end up filing a Chapter 13 because they do have a tax liability, maybe haven't paid your income taxes for a couple of years. And unless the tax liability is paid in full prior to filing a Chapter 7, you have to file a Chapter 13 to come current on your tax liability. So the other option is a Chapter 11, which is generally intended for large businesses. You hear about airlines that have filed a Chapter 11. Some of the automakers have filed Chapter 11s. Very complicated. Some individuals will file a Chapter 11 if they have the Chapter 13 bankruptcy code will not allow you to file a Chapter 13 if you have a greater amount of unsecured debt over. I believe the current debt limit is it's about $285,000. If you have unsecured debts greater than that, you're not eligible for a Chapter 13. So a Chapter 11 filing then becomes an option, but they are rare, very non-typical for a consumer to file a Chapter 11. So
that's good to know. That helps us to understand quite a bit. So when a person is needing some help with debt relief and they're just underwater with all their bills and they need help, coming to a bankruptcy attorney like yourself, you can help sort them out and guide them which function is best for them.
That's right. Based on their financial situation, another common problem with not being able to file a Chapter 7 is if your income is greater than the median income in the state of Washington, then the U.S. Trustee's Office will essentially force you to file a Chapter 13 if you're greater than the median income in the state of Washington. And so we will take a look at your financial situation, assess the debts you have, assess your income, assess your assets, and then make the determination for our clients as to whether or not they're going to be best suited for a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13. Generally, I try to get them into a 7 because it's a lot more beneficial for the debtor to do the Chapter 7 rather than the Chapter 13. But there are just some times when it's not going to happen, and so then we have to help them provide a plan to the bankruptcy court and proceed with their Chapter 13.
That's good to know. So what other issues might pop up when somebody's looking to file bankruptcy in a Chapter 7 or Chapter 13?
So there are some problems with the Chapter 7. It's good if you're contemplating filing a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13 to come in and talk with the bankruptcy attorney. Even if it's 6 months out, there's some things that I can advise you that are going to keep you out of trouble. Don't transfer any of your assets to try to hide them from the bankruptcy court. That's number one rule. Payments to family members within a year of filing are considered preferential. That can get you in trouble with the trustee that's appointed on your bankruptcy. Payments to unsecured creditors within 90 days of filing. If you pay more money to one unsecured creditor over another, it's considered a preferential transfer. That can get you into trouble. If you purchase some luxury items within 60 days of filing, that can get you in trouble with the bankruptcy court. And so there are just some things that, if you're not familiar with the bankruptcy code, that we can advise you against doing and keep you out of trouble when you have to file your Chapter 7 bankruptcy.
That's good to know. So basically what it does is it gives you a fresh opportunity to rebuild your financial life and assets in a fair way to you and the courts, as long as you're honest and upfront.
That's right, Brad. There's situations that come in people's lives, accumulation of medical bills, unforeseen death in the family when the primary income provider, maybe he has passed away. People find themselves in financial trouble for an assortment of reasons, and the bankruptcy code is designed to do exactly that, to provide debtors with a fresh start, get their feet back under them, and move forward with their lives.
That's good to know. There seems to be a little bit of stigma. The people are a little bit ashamed if they have to go through the bankruptcy procedures, but it's really just a tool there to help them out when they're without any other options. Is that correct?
That's right. It's an option, and it's generally an option of last resort. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I think Dave Ramsey filed for bankruptcy, and now he provides financial advice to people all over the world, and has built himself a business providing financial advice. But I think Dave Ramsey filed bankruptcy at one point. So it's just an option to consider when you get to a point where you're overwhelmed with your financial situation.
That's good to know. We appreciate you taking the time to educate us and our viewers on their choices and options with bankruptcy today.
Thank you, Brad.
And thank you for joining us on UBLUR TV. I hope that we'll see you again on another broadcast.